My name is Rachel Arnold. I'm an Inclusion Program Officer with the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and I'm here today with Christopher Patnoe from Google's Accessibility Lab. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us for this interview today. To get started, you head up Google's Accessibility Lab in London. Can you share how you began working in the accessibility space?
So the Accessibility Discovery Center, it's a 1 year old today. Actually, we launched it 1 year ago, and we just did a count, and we've had over 2,000 people come through from outside of Google into the lab. My original goal was 500 people by the end of the year. So we certainly underestimated the appetite of people wanting to learn about inclusion and accessibility. So that's really exciting. But my path into accessibility was sort of accidental. I was leading a team I was the lead program manager, technical program manager for Google Play Music. And we had a test engineer come into our meeting, and she turned on voiceover, and I heard button, 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 button. I asked, what's that? She said, well, this is Google Play Music for someone who's blind. I said, well, that's stupid. How do they use it? Well, that's why I'm here. And so that was my introduction. I just couldn't look away. I thought it was an interesting design challenge, an interesting engineering challenge, and I made it a 20% role for a while, and then I eventually made it my full-time job. And my first job was to make all of Google's products accessible by building up accessibility teams around the company. And then I moved here to Europe in middle of COVID in July 2021, and the ADC was one of the first things that we built.
Amazing. And congratulations on the anniversary. That's a wonderful coincidence. I didn't realize that was today.
Yeah, I didn't realize until we talked about it this morning.
Amazing. Yeah. So why do you think it's important for Google and other large technology companies to prioritize accessibility in their work?
Well, accessibility in the end is really about making the best product possible for the most people. But for some people, that's not enough reason. So everyone's going to have their own reason for accessibility. For some people, it's going to be because of legal risk. For some people, it's going to be because of brand risk. For other people, it's going to be because you have to, because if you want to sell into government. So everyone's going to have their own answer. And in my experience, if you're starting, you need to learn what's the right combination of FOMO versus brand versus legal to work with and speak to your leadership, because everyone's going to be motivated by different things. For us, it is really about leaning into our mission statement, which is to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. And universally accessible really does include everybody. So that kind of helps with us, but it is always something that is in progress. We're always making it better and better and better over time.
Great, thank you. Can you explain how Google has worked to institutionalize disability inclusion across the company? You talked about how when you moved into this role, you were doing it part-time with your pre-existing role. So what lessons from that experience would you share with others that are trying to institutionalize disability within their own organizations and companies?
If I would speak to, there's two audiences here. One of the audiences is the people with disabilities ourselves. And here it is, be patient, be noisy, be passionate, but don't get too upset if things don't move as fast as you would want them to, because they're never going to go as fast as you want. But you have the right to be there. You have a right to thrive, and you have a right to a great career. And sometimes you need to advocate for yourself for what those things are. On the business side, you need people with disabilities because they help you create better products. You need them because they're us. You need people with disabilities on your staff because they help us solve problems, because people with disabilities spend their lives. We spend our lives solving for problems of a world that wasn't designed with us in mind. All of those things matter. And we're also highly educated, skilled, loyal workers when we're well treated. Lots of reasons on both sides. But both of them start with trust, and both of them have to do with a lot of listening.
Great, thank you so much. Do you have any lessons for people who are working in tech companies, website developers, people working in this space, providers, that so they can encourage their clients to consider accessibility for users with disabilities?
At a personal level, I consider a website that's inaccessible as it's a bug, not a feature. So if you want to make something that is useful for the broadest audience, thinking of the audience who we have here with IFES, if a segment of the community can't use the website or can't use the tool, they're being disempowered from their ability to speak out for themselves. So that's a bug. That's not a feature. It's something you just should do. Now, how you sell that inside each corporation and each organization is different. But if you realize it is a right for someone to be able to have their own voice, it is necessary for someone to be able to speak on their own behalf in a safe and secure way. This is the job. And as in technology, we have the ability to create technologies that can help them do that, hopefully.
Wonderful. I love that you emphasize that it's a bug, not a feature. I think that is the way that we approach our work at IFES, very different than what you're doing at Google. But I love that you emphasize that. Before we get into some specifics around the use of technology for elections, I just have one final question. How should people approach new technology and understand the potential that they might have to increase accessibility and inclusion for people with disabilities? Are there any key questions that people should keep in mind as they're evaluating these technologies to understand the benefits and the risks?
One is it compliant? I mean, is it technically accessible? Two, how useful is it? Because it actually, is it easy to use? Can I actually do the things that I want through this technology? Three, was it designed by or with people with disabilities? And four, will you support me when we find a problem? Because it's never going to be perfect. So one, make it work. Two, make it usable. Three, make it useful. And four, let's work together to solve these problems, because there's always going to be problems.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think that key piece there is working together, having people with disabilities involved to understand what they need and also to help work through any issues that arise. So excellent, wonderful. So I'm going to move on to a few questions about elections and technology. At IFES, we work a lot with election management bodies, the government organizations that are responsible for making elections happen. And so they often don't have a lot of technical expertise or resources to keep up to date on new and emerging technologies. It's not their mandate necessarily. So what kind of strategies would you suggest for these election management bodies and government organizations to stay on the cutting edge of new accessible technologies that are emerging?
One, I think it is a realization that just because you've always done it this way doesn't make it the right thing to do and the right way to do it. So you don't want to have a bias of, well, it's always been this way. Of course it's fine. It's probably not. How often do you need to check? Really depends on your ability to actually implement change. My assumption is you don't want to do it the year before the election happens. So maybe you take some time to lick your wounds after the last election, and then identify one or two ways that you could try to make things more inclusive. If there's 25 things in the world you could do to make your election more inclusive, you can't do all of them. So pick something. Start with one thing even. The most important thing is that you get started. And then once you decide what you want to do, partner with organizations like IFES, partner with organizations like Google, partner with organizations like advocacy organizations, NGOs, charities. Talk to the people who live in these worlds. Again, the world was not designed for someone who's blind. They spend a lot of time in fixing problems. They may have solutions for you for things you didn't even know was a problem. So have the initiative to make things better. Start narrowly, and over time you'll make these things better and better.
A common barrier faced by voters with visual disabilities, as you were just talking about, is inaccessible information in polling stations. A lot of the time, information on how to vote is on a poster that doesn't have an audio or a video option available for voters with visual disabilities. What kind of existing technologies do you think can be adapted in the election space to help increase access? For example, I know that there are tools that Google has been working on in this space.
Yeah. So in this situation, for example, say there's a poster on the wall. Maybe what could be done is for there to be on site an approved mobile phone or tablet that has a thing called OCR, optical character recognition, and a TTS, a text to speech engine. For example, Google has a wonderful tool called Lookout, which has many languages, and it does exactly this. It reads things for you. So what you would do is you would hold up the phone to this poster and it would read it out loud for you. You plug it in your headphones, so it's private, and you can have it read out loud for you. You could have it read the ballot that you're trying to work with. And there's other things having to do with ballots when it comes to where to vote and things like that. But in terms of getting the information in on how to vote, OCR and TTS are simple applications, simple features that can be added to almost any phone in many, many languages. And it's just work. It's wiring these things together into maybe an official election application for the government. So you understand what languages you want. You can even pre-program some of the information there, or at least use the OCR to explain things that are happening in the room.
Do you see any major applications for augmented or virtual reality to help increase access in a similar way? Have you seen any kind of cool experiments using these technologies?
So virtual reality is helpful if you have a situation where someone needs help figuring out how to get into a room, or if they're dealing with deep anxiety, it could give them a chance to work and see what the space is like. So it can give you some nice situational awareness. It can allow you to practice what it's going to be like to do it, so you know what you need to do. But unfortunately, VR is not particularly helpful for people with visual impairments because we don't have the ability to translate VR into an oral experience, excuse me. If you do anything like VR, please make sure whatever you do has captions, and just make sure that the captions are included. Like with any video you would ever make, please make sure captions are included in relevant languages. You could also do audio descriptions in which you could actually have, if you make a film, you can have someone have like a voiceover track describing to you the things that are being seen. So you could take a VR experience and make it into a flatty, I'm thinking you would say on YouTube, for example, and have a voice describe to you what's actually happening on the screen. So you can do it offline for VR for someone who has visual impairments. When it comes to AR, this OCR I was talking about is sort of AR-like. It's taking the real world information and using the mobile device to explain what's there. With a little bit of work in the future, you could, instead of having a tactile ballot, you could allow your finger to sort of have it follow your finger and have it read where these lines are, so you know where you want to vote. So with a little bit of work, and there's nothing out of the box that does this today, with a little work, augmented reality could be a really interesting tool that could help people vote for themselves.
Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about privacy and personal cybersecurity. A lot of the time, experts are pointing out issues with privacy and security for these new technologies that we've been discussing. Are there any concerns that people with disabilities should keep in mind regarding any of the technologies we've talked about today?
Well, the technologies I've talked about today are generally pretty well vetted and understood to be private. It requires no information of you for them to be helpful or useful. So most of them, if not all of them, can be done on device. So there's no need to ship any data off into the real world, into the cloud. So everything can be done there on site, on the device, without it having to know who you are. If you start looking at these newer technologies like generative AI and these AI-based technologies, they start to be of little more concern, because the more they know about you, the more they can customize themselves to you. But that's far away from being useful today. So I wouldn't worry about that now. But as these technologies evolve over time, in the next 2, 4, 6 years, there could be some AI technologies that are helpful. But then we need to make sure that people with disabilities are involved in the process of developing these AI algorithms, because they're as inherently as biased as the humans are that made them. And we have to make sure by testing them, making sure the data is that was used to help train it is inclusive. So they need to sort of progress at the speed of trust. If you don't understand how it was built, You can't really understand what the ramifications are. Is there an inadvertent bias against you? And I don't want to take any credit for that expression. Jutta Trevenius came with that expression, but I love it, so I quote her. JUTTATREVNIEUS, or something like that.
I love that as well. I'm going to have to integrate that. That's a really wonderful quote. Thank you for sharing that one. All right. For our last question, I wanted to ask if you have any recommendations for election management bodies on how they can ensure the technology they procure in elections is accessible and take advantage of accessibility features on technology they already use. And that might be voting machines, that might be their websites where people go to gather information, and other tools that that they use to interact with the public.
Well, the first step is ask the question of the people who are providing you services and information. Because if you don't ask the question, they're never going to volunteer it. So make it something that's expected. Make it an understandable thing. I'm not going to buy this if it isn't accessible. And then they'll provide you with some kind of VPAT or some kind of accessibility conformance report. Check it. Make sure it doesn't say not compliant or partially compliant for things that are critical for the workflow that you're trying to work through. Because the VPAT is only as useful, the ACR is only as useful as the information that goes on it. It takes some analysis, so don't make it a tick box thing. Check it out to make sure it has the features you expect it to. If you don't, if it doesn't, move on to the next company. If you can't move on to another company, hold them accountable. Tell them these are the features that are necessary, and make it a part of the acquisition of their technology that it's dependent upon them fixing these in time for it to be rolled into your systems, to be rolled out in time for the election.
Great. Thank you so much, Christopher, for your time today, and for sharing your knowledge and experience.